Hey enablers, Mike Kunkle here. Welcome to this week's edition of Sales Enablement Straight Talk. This week, I want to talk to you about how to merge two very important concepts, psychological safety and accountability. And rather than talk generally about it, I want to laser in on how to do this when you're trying to train, coach, and change the behavior of your sales force, such as during a sales methodology implementation. Let's dig in. The first thing I want to address is why even this topic? Why is this so important? And this is the reason. In 2019, ATD, the Association for Talent Development, in their State of Sales Training report, asked respondents this question: what's the top barrier to sales training effectiveness? This is a scary answer. The top barrier was salespeople are not held accountable for applying the skills learned in training. Now, I know this is 2019, but we all know seriously this hasn't changed. And in fact, the previous survey where they asked the same question was 2016, and then it was 50%. We're actually moving in the wrong direction. The next question is why psychological safety? Why is this concept so important? And Google did two extensive studies called Project Oxygen, whose goal was to answer the question, what makes a great manager? And then Project Aristotle, the goal of which was to answer the question, what makes a top performing team? And they examined top performance to identify differentiators. Creating a safe, empowering, inclusive, psychological safe environment was a common theme in these studies at Google and in many other studies as well. You know, someone recently told me that a conference speaker boiled this down to trust. Now, look, trust is critical, and while I believe that's a major component of psychological safety, the studies report that it's more than just that. It's trust plus the vulnerability that trust encourages, a feeling of security, a non-judgmental atmosphere, a tolerance for mistakes and differences, and a comfort with managers and colleagues. If we're applying this concept to role play, how you introduce, set the stage, and lead the role play sessions will all contribute to a psychologically safe environment. Good, clear instructions and positive, supportive, growth-oriented messaging will help. But the practice that will likely have the biggest impact on how it's perceived and whether your team will continue to engage is how you lead the debrief sessions. Let's take a look at that. So here's a format that's worked for me when doing role play debriefs and trying to foster psychological safety. It seems counterintuitive, but it can be done. And I always start with the seller first, the person who was playing the sales role in the role play. And then I start with positive feedback first. So here's an example. Hey, Mike, let's start with you as the salesperson. What did you like about that? What do you feel you did well? Now, here's something I've observed for many years. People will naturally start to critique themselves first or shift into a critique quickly after mentioning one positive thing. It's your role to redirect that and shape that behavior into the right pattern to form a habit. Positive first, then constructive. Here's an example of what I might say. Well, thanks, Mike. I really appreciate your desire to improve, but we'll get to that in just a minute. Let's step back into what went well. What else went well? And now you've redirected them back. Then you can do constructive. And even the constructive feedback should be done in a positive manner with growth-oriented phrasing. An example might be, okay, Mike, great analysis. Now, if you were to do it all over again, what would you like to do differently or even better? And again, I'm phrasing positively with a growth-oriented message. This helps foster psychological safety and gets us started off on the right foot. Next, I do the customer role, and I do this second for perspective on what it felt like on the receiving end but using similar positive phrasing for the questions as we demonstrated previously. Here's how I might start. What did you like about what Mike did, or what felt great about that to you as the customer? Then you can move into constructive. What suggestions do you have for Mike for him to consider for next time? Now, again, you will occasionally have an opportunity here to really help your sellers understand how they come across to others. You know, when someone is learning a new model or following steps to practice a new skill, they're very often in their head, right? Thinking about the model and the skills and the steps and trying to use them. To them, it may feel awkward, forced, or fake. It's new, it's uncomfortable. Yet to the other person, the customer role and observers, it just seems natural, like the seller is simply having a conversation. They don't know what's going on in the seller's head or how hard they're working to use this new model they've learned. If you sense your seller is feeling this way or they express it, which sometimes they do, ask the customer what it felt like from their perspective, and then the observers what it seemed like from the outside. This can drive home several important points for your learners. A second option to help with this is to record the role play using the seller's phone and then give them the recording and they can watch it themselves afterward or later to get that outside perspective and see how they're truly coming across. This can be really helpful. Once you've done that, it's time to move to the observer role. Now, this could be the single observer in a triad role play, sales, customer, observer, or the entire audience in a fishbowl role play where two people were role playing in front of the group. In either case, ask for feedback from the observer role next and follow the same format. Positive first, then constructive, and use similar positive phrasing for both questions, as we've already demonstrated. And now, the sales manager or coach should weigh in last and flip the order. Do constructive first, then positive, so you're ending on a positive encouragement. This debrief method, when well led and facilitated by the sales manager or coach, can foster psychological safety and a growth mindset. It's not a magic pill nor a silver bullet, but it will help you turn the most grizzled role-play haters into sellers who can at first at least tolerate it until they start to see results, when then they'll really start to get engaged. I've personally seen this happen in just a few sessions, and sometimes a few weeks, in the worst case, maybe a few months. But with consistent application, you'll get there. Just remember that many of your sellers may have had bad past experiences with this and may need some time to get over having their hand pressed on the hot stove burner right in the past and to get over their fear of messing up or even fear of public speaking. And yes, I see that even in sales pros. Be patient, it pays off. So now let's talk about layering accountability into this to encourage behavior change and growth toward mastery. I love these quotes about accountability. You can pause to review them more closely if you want. I especially enjoy this last one by Patrick Lencioni. Failing to hold someone accountable is ultimately an act of selfishness. Something worth thinking about. Now, let's talk about this in context of changing behavior in the role play that we've been discussing. Here are some approaches that I know work and that I encourage you to consider. First, don't stop. Simply role-playing what was taught and reinforcing the skill use is a great first step. Continuing to do it over time is better. While you should also state it explicitly, in other words, set clear expectations and state your positive and helpful intentions, the actions you take do a better job of establishing expectations through behavior versus just words. Walk the talk. When a seller role plays and gets feedback, what usually happens next? That's right, you move on to someone else's role play. What a missed opportunity. Now, realistically, I understand that time restrictions may sometimes make this difficult or impossible, but Whenever the role plays are short, such as a single skill practice, or when you have the time, ask the seller to redo or rerun the role play immediately, or maybe even after some brief planning. But the goal is to incorporate the feedback they've received. When that's not possible, set the expectation that you or their manager, if you're not their manager, will follow up to rerun the role play with the feedback incorporated at the next team meeting or one-on-one coaching session. Using job aids and worksheets and incorporating them into workflow is a great way to help your reps use what they've learned on the job. If you're not building worksheets and tools like this as part of your training and enablement efforts, I highly recommend it. You can embed the concepts directly into your CRM screens or attach documents at appropriate places. But in either case, getting the reps to use the worksheets to plan how to apply what they learned in training to the real world is a wonderful support tool to foster accountability. Practical application templates. I talked about this tool in the last newsletter, so in the written newsletter that accompanies this video, I'll drop a link for you to review that and download the template and PowerPoint. But basically, this is a slide that has all of the modules or lessons that you've taught on the left side, and on the top right, you list a case scenario, and then on the bottom right, you leave space for brainstorming how you can apply what was taught on the left to the case scenario on the top right. This is a great way to get people thinking long term about how to apply what they've learned in real life scenarios. This is a no-brainer, but not always done. You need to go observe your sellers in action or listen to call recordings. These are two wonderful ways to ensure that what's being taught is being used. And of course, then you can use what you learn to coach them to mastery. I mentioned this above as part of reruns, but it bears repeating. If you follow up group sessions or training with a continuation in your smaller team meetings or your one-on-one meetings, it definitely encourages accountability to continue to use and hone what was learned. Did you ever hear the saying, trust in Allah but tie your camel? It's a Muslim proverb. I heard this phrase many years ago, and it reminds me of the more recent trust but verify. In both cases, all these sayings simply mean is to inspect what you expect. Not due to a lack of trust, but because even with the best of intentions, other things get in the way of people doing what you want them to do or what they know they should. There are a myriad of reasons why people don't do things, and when it's important, like getting adoption of your sales methodology and achieving mastery, it's also important to inspect what you expect to foster accountability. Here's one that is surprisingly powerful. In Sales Coaching Excellence, I teach a field training model and a coaching model that both include understanding checks at every step. While this is just really great communication, it's also an excellent excuse remover and a tool to foster accountability. In the graphic, note that the check marks are at the end of each step. These are the understanding checks. Use the field training model as an example here, and let's take a closer look. In tell, you tell the reps what to do. You're teaching, you're educating, and then have them summarize your expectations back to you. That's the understanding check. You don't leave this step until they can summarize it to your satisfaction. Then you show the rep how it should be done. A role play, right? You role play the skill to demonstrate it for them. And then you have them role play it back to you. That's the understanding check. And again, you don't leave this step until they can demonstrate the skill to your satisfaction. Now you know they understood and they could do it. And so on throughout the model. It's the same with the coaching model. This is an excellent way to foster accountability. If the rep can clearly explain what you expect and demonstrate that they can do it, then there's no knowledge or skill gap that would prevent them from executing. Still doesn't mean they will, right? But they can. Other things might get in their way, such as fear or a lack of belief it will work in the real world or other things. But if they don't do it, it's no longer a skill issue. You've removed that off the table. There are other barriers you must address. The understanding check is an ultimate excuse remover. And here are all 8 suggestions at once without the bullet shading. Well, that's it for this week, enablers. I hope this helps you see how psychological safety and accountability are not as counterintuitive as one might initially think. And by merging them into your reinforcement efforts, think, change management, you will definitely get better results. Remember to check out the written newsletter for a bit more detail, and as always, stay the course and make an impact with enablement.